and welcome everybody. This is Talking About Coaching and Psychedelics. I'm here with Heather.
Hi.
Yeah, as I usually am.
Hello.
Please say hello. Today we have an exciting guest, Daniel Shankin, and I'm quite excited about it. Heather, you've met him a few times. I actually just realized we're recording this straight after that. I think I had met him too, and I was just saying I just love his attitude and philosophy of just. He mentioned being a good neighbor. I quite like that, showing up to things, getting to know the people in your community, and kind of generally supporting each other. He's a lovely bloke, very, very knowledgeable, quite inspiring. I like his views, and can't wait for you to get a piece of his mind, so to speak. You've met Daniel a few times, right?
I've met him a few times, as you said, when he says I'm a good neighbor. That's how I know him, just from community meetings I've been in. I went to a mushroom cultivation class and he was there. So I just know him from the community. Mount Tam Integration is his company's name. And Mount Tamalpais is our beautiful mountain that's in Marin County right here that we can see every day. Mm-hmm. And he's an amazing coach. He does integration coaching, prep for psychedelic experiences. He also does mindfulness and meditation coaching. He's a mentor to other coaches and has a mentorship program. He's got 2 podcasts. He teaches many classes for the community. And so he's really knowledgeable in this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's just a wonderful human being as well. I've met him as somebody who's not just knowledgeable, but also really funny.
Funny, yes.
Very present. And I never quite knew when he was, is this a pause or did he stop speaking? Which I think is, for a coach, a really amazing quality, because you always kind of have the opportunity to go in, but there's also opportunity for lots of silences. So it's like, however you are, it'll be a wonderful kind of conversational space that is, I guess, for people who like real certainty, a little bit unsettling. But I quite like the vibe. There's a lot of potential for exploration in there.
Yes. Yeah. It's got great energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think people are really curious. Is there anything that people should know about Daniel before we jump into the conversation?
I think that's it. He's been a coach he's been working in this space for 20 years now. So he's got a lot to share with us.
Cool. Well, then I would say, without further ado, let's get into it.
All right. This is Daniel Sitaram Das Shankin.
Hello, and welcome to Talking About Coaching and Psychedelics.
Thank you. What a wonderful topic. I'm so glad to be here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
Yeah, well, the idea of this is really to talk about, coaching and psychedelics, as it says on the tin. And so I'm really grateful to have you here. And we're going to do a little bit of an intro before, after, it's all come together. But just by means of introduction, I always like the question of, how do you introduce yourself at a dinner party? Like, if somebody asks you, hey, what do you do? Just like, a normal person. What do you say?
Party. I tell them that I'm a psychedelic integration coach, and I founded an organization that supports people who are deeply committed to transformation, mm-hmm. and who also happen to be interested in psychedelics.
Yeah. Is there a question that usually comes afterwards from people?
Well, I think I told somebody today, and they were like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, there's, people more and more have learned that psychedelics can be used for personal growth and healing. And that those people are often more cautious than we were when we were kids. And they want to take some time to prepare themselves to make sure that they get the maximum benefit and have the least possibility of harm. And then afterwards, they often have had, they often have an experience that leaves them with many things to talk about. And some of those things are questions, and some of those things are inspirations. People want to take the lessons they've learned and bring them into their life. And sometimes people want to unpack some things that were revealed, make meaning out of them, and how use them to kind of recontextualize their lives and the way that they have viewed themselves and their personal history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and and who are you? Can you sum yourself up in a couple of sentences, just in terms of like what kind of background you're bringing into this? I know there's a lot of facets to what you do professionally. I'm sure there's many more to who you are personally. But like, if we were to ask, who are you? And so people can get a bit of a sense for the perspective that you're talking from, what would you say?
Well, I would say that my work comes from, over 2 decades of teaching and practicing yoga and meditation. And so in the context of this, I was, a heavy psychedelic user in college. And I didn't use the word recreational because I'm not even sure there is such a thing. People start off with a recreational intention, but even so, it can become spiritual and therapeutic very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I can't count the number of people who have told me they were at a concert or a rave or a party, and they received all of the answers to life. And so there was no integration that I knew of in 1999, 1998, when this was happening. A friend of mine gave me a copy of Be Here Now. He was a little bit older, he was a little bit wiser. And he told me that if I read Be Here Now, things would be okay. And actually, in the back of that book is an integration manual that Ram Dass calls a cookbook for a sacred life. And so that seemed like a good way to go. I was already a yoga practitioner. And so I just dove deep into that. And I started practicing in earnest and practicing meditation in earnest. I became a teacher. I owned a yoga studio for a while. And, kept moving from, found that I liked one-on-one conversations much more than huge classes, because there's one thing to tell 50 people in a room to do triangle pose. It's a whole other thing to ask one person what triangle pose means to them. Mm-hmm. And you learn more. I learned more that way. It's more interactive. And so, kind of coaching emerged from that desire, to just kind of move from the very active to the more contemplative, right? My coaching team seems to be contemplative in nature. And around this time, I'd been coaching a couple of years, as opposed to teaching, it sort of shifted. And more people wanted to talk about psychedelics all on their own. And I realized that, and I had discovered integration circles, and I wanted to hold one because there wasn't one in my neighborhood. And so I started doing integration circles, and the coaching clients came. And that's what happened. That's the
formulated. Sounds like it really formulated out of a need, both personally and for the community.
Yes.
Why do you think psychedelics and coaching go well together? Why are they a good marriage?
Because, so, the basic, the bare bones of coaching, as I understand it, is, situation, outcome, action. You're in one place, you want to be somewhere else, and what are you going to do to get there? Psychedelics show us the situation more clearly, right? And shows us our part in the situation. I can talk to so many people about what's wrong with their company. And we're only going to get so far. When people start to see what's possible for them as far as how maybe they can contribute to the culture of their company in new ways, or how they can be more proactive in order to create more opportunities for themselves, right? And that's just in a corporate setting, and this happens, all throughout in people's personal and professional lives, that they are consistently focused on the external. We all are, because it's sometimes hard to look at the internal, because it means we have to be vulnerable and we have to feel things that are painful. And so, and even in a coaching conversation, I watch people, I'm sure you see this too, people like bob and weave trying to duck the discomfort of their own emotional life. And you try to guide them back gently, and guide them back gently, and guide them back gently. And It's hard, and it takes practice to be able to sit with, and this is a meditation skill. The ability to sit with discomfort is a capacity that needs to be grown. Mm-hmm. Psychedelics are a crash course in sitting with discomfort, right? And all of our highly sophisticated methods of evasion, right, don't work in the face of psychedelics, right? They're wiped away. And then also, it's like we've learned from the neurological studies that they've done of people on psilocybin is that it wires the brain up. It allows parts of the brain that don't ordinarily talk to each other to talk to each other, which means we're effectively smarter, which means that we're going to be looking at things from a more cohesive, holistic point of view. And we're going to be able to see things that we just naturally missed because we were focused on something else. Mm-hmm. And so seeing those things more clearly and seeing how our own actions and thoughts are contributing to our suffering, right? It's only natural that we're then going to be able to envision what's possible if we change them, the outcome, and what we have to do to get there, the actions. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's also making we have a lot more connections going on, but it also puts us in a much more vulnerable state because we make connections that we hadn't made before, and that can be quite confusing for people, or a bit intimidating as well. So that brings up for me the question, like where's that line? I mean, it's a big gray area, but like at what point does it become therapy or therapeutic? Because there's so much work we can do as we open up these spaces with people. And they can be quite deep journeys, especially when we integrate experiences like that. So where do you see it, one transforming into the other?
I don't know. I'm not a therapist. Excuse me. What I would say is, in a lot of ways, I think that coaches and coaching clients demand more of each other. Coaching has an aspect of performance, right? My coaching is deeply developmental, right? So it's more internal as opposed to hitting sales markers or something like that. Mm-hmm. But, a coaching client seems to want to see results quicker from a coach than they do from a therapist, right? People sort of have the understanding that they're going to navel gaze with their therapist for 30 years and not see any results, and they're okay with that. They don't seem to be willing to accept that from a coach. Mm-hmm. And so there is also, right, so there is also this aspect of, the population that we're working with. Right, I refer out people with serious mental illness, right, that need therapists. I work really well with like healthy, resilient people, give or take, people with a little bit of depression, people who are like a little bit traumatized, but not too much more than that. What the way I'm going to ask people to look, is going to be, slightly challenging, perhaps. And I generally like my folks to be in pretty close to good working order. Mm-hmm. So I have conversations with my therapist friends, and what we do with our people is often very similar. So I tend to ask for more action, right? I ask people to make perhaps more commitments than they do. I'm thinking about a few conversations, but I think, therapy is about a relationship with somebody who is highly skilled at working with people with serious mental illness.
So when a client comes to you wanting to work with you, how do you screen them to make sure they're appropriate? what does an appropriate client look like for you? How do you know it's going to be a good fit?
Well, I think it's that kind of thing that I just said. I often ask them to opt out. I see if we're flowing. I often ask a lot of questions, and if they don't answer them, that's a red flag. If they're not capable of answering them, or if those questions.
Like what, for example?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we just start going. On one hand, I am sort of describing my process. On another hand, we are sort of starting to look under the hood a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so, what it's like, you're just following breadcrumbs. That's the nice thing about, coaching the way I do it. I've seen coaches who are basically just kind of imposing their agenda on folks, kind of thing. And they know what, maybe they know all the questions or something like that. And I do a little bit of that in an intake, but I really appreciate client-led work, mm-hmm. where the client gets to set their own goals and their own metrics of success. Mm-hmm. Coming from a yoga background that had a lot of like the guru disciple model entrenched, I'm really happy to be free of that, right? The guru disciple model is like, I'm right and I know what's best for you. And don't take this out of context, okay? Don't like make a snippet where it's like, I'm right. So the guru disciple model says that the guru is always right and the guru knows what's best for the disciple. And that if the disciple doesn't follow the guru's advice to the letter of the law, then they're bad. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that this can lead to all kinds of abuse and other unpleasantness. And so the ability to just sort of place myself in service to the client's development is huge. And that the client gets to pick what that means instead of me being like, oh, you just want to be enlightened.
So do you get that people come to you wanting guidance? Because coaching is such a loosely defined practice. And I hear you say that you kind of explain in the beginning, it's part of your kind of process to explain what that space is and what it's like, what your philosophy is around it. Do you get a lot of people that come to you and looking for a directive approach to coaching?
Right. Some. And, what they're often looking for in a directive sense is they want me to teach them practices. So I get a lot of people who are looking for a coach that is a meditation teacher of sorts. Mm-hmm. And more recently, also like business coaching, like, oh, you have a successful coaching business. How do you do that? And so we talk about that, right? So there's like that sort of thing. And then that will have a little bit more of the teaching voice to it, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with Doug Silsby's 8 Voices?
No.
He wrote a book called, he wrote 3 books, and it's either mindfulness-based coaching or The Mindful Coach. And he talks about, often we rely on the inquiry voice. We ask questions of our clients to allow them to find their own resourcefulness. And sometimes we use the teacher voice when we're sharing information or models. And sometimes we're using the partner voice when we're talking about what our agreements are going to look like and all these sorts of things. And it's just useful to know which one you're using in any given time and why. Mm-hmm. Right. And if I have a habit, right, what if I as a coach have an unconscious habit to just move towards advice for whatever reason? It's like I need to look at that, hopefully with my own coach, and deconstruct whatever that is. And perhaps I have a habit that I avoid something. Maybe I avoid accountability. It's uncomfortable for me to hold my clients accountable. Well, I need to look at that, hopefully with my own coach, so that my own crap isn't getting in the way of me being of service.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it sounds like you do a lot of different types of coaching. What would you say is important for coaches who want to work specifically with psychedelics, to, as far as knowledge, how they go about getting into working with psychedelics? Kind of.
You do them.
Do that. Yeah.
I hate telling people, like, it's sort of, I don't really advocate, like, I'm not really trying to advocate psychedelic use necessarily. I'm really trying to advocate for consciousness and meditation and building awareness for people who use psychedelics. But if you want to be, I know psychedelic coaches out there who have gotten high like twice. And also they kind of just quit their professional job. They quit their professional job. They did psychedelics twice, and they, are really basically neither psychedelic nor a coach. So on one hand, I would steep yourself in a medicine or two so that you understand the ins and the outs of it, and that you have, just like a life coach. Isn't it always silly when you see like an 18-year-old life coach?
It's ridiculous.
And it's like, well, maybe
not necessarily.
Really?
Not necessarily. I know. I'm just saying. I know there are exceptions that prove the rule, but you would hope that like a life coach has a breadth and depth of life experience. You would hope that a psychedelic coach has a depth and breadth of psychedelic experience, so that when you say, "and then that happened," you're like, "Oh yeah, that happens," and right, and then the fairies showed up. Of course, yeah. Sometimes the fairies show up. There shouldn't be surprises.
Well, it's a super interesting conversation, that, because we've had that in some of our drop-in meetings. It's like, to what extent do we need experience in the field in order to coach somebody? And I guess it depends on our coaching approach, at least the way I see it. For example, you could argue from the same perspective that if you're a CEO, you would want a coach who's been a CEO. Where in fact, like I have to have been, perhaps it's good to have an experience of having been in a position of great responsibility, so I can kind of empathize and sympathize with some of what you're telling me. But if I take the position of a coach who doesn't need to know your experience, because I assume that your experience is quite unique, regardless of what have I experienced, whether I have tripped before, whether I have been a CEO before, I can hold a space where you try to make sense of what's happening to you. So I think there is a valid argument that you don't need to have been an expert in having done your own psychedelic journey, whereas I think it sure helps, but sometimes it can be in the way.
Yeah, I don't know. I maybe, but the thing about that, it's a totally different landscape. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that if you're coaching a CEO, there are many things that are probably useful depending on what that CEO wants. The psychological depths that get explored, I think it would be beneficial. And I think it just, I'm just hope that people are served, right, at the deepest level that they can be. And, in the rush to scale and medicalize, there is a lot of corners being cut. Mm-hmm. Capitalism is all about cutting corners. And that's how people get hurt. That's how people get misunderstood and they don't get seen, right? Capitalism doesn't care to look at you. Capitalism doesn't care to hear you. Capitalism, it doesn't care about doing its due diligence. And so, I'm just hoping that coaches are doing their due diligence. And that also includes for, the people who are deep trippers, right? So there might be people here who are coaches who are not very psychedelically inclined. They're like, oh, but I'll do psychedelic integration coaching. That is probably better than people who have done a lot of psychedelics that don't have any coaching training.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right. So I don't want to I don't want to work with either one of them, probably. Right. But better that first one than the second one. So if you're psychedelically inclined, get freaking trained. Mm-hmm. like do rigorous training
In coaching.
in coaching,
In coaching.
at least, and other healing modalities.
Mm-hmm. What do you consider rigorous training? And I mean, we could ask, well,
Yeah.
what have you done to prepare for this? But also, there's a more general question that I think would be useful to kind of hone in on. Is like, what would you put out there to coaches who have had experiences and who would consider this kind of journey? Because
Right.
that's what our group, I noticed that there's plenty of very experienced coaches in our group. There's very experienced journeyers in our group. But there's
Sure.
also people who
How do you
just got into
bridge?
coaching and they just got into psychedelics and they're curious. You know, what would you recommend?
We'll get trained at the ACC level at least,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, the ICF, there's the International Coaching Federation, and they have a standard.
What is it? I think it's
Right.
40 hours of training, 75
Yeah.
hours of coaching or something like that.
Right, which is nothing. There's some mentor coaching mixed in, and that's nothing. So I'm trained at the ACC level.
Mm-hmm.
I have been doing client work for 20 years, you know, as a yoga and meditation teacher. I have scads of yoga teacher trainings, meditation teacher trainings, Thai massage, you know, Marma therapy, Ayurveda, chronic healing, like all kinds of things that, you know, I've just, and that's just sort of how I am. You know, I've been sort of a solopreneur my whole life, freelance healer my whole life. And so if you're going to show up so all of those modalities again, so then we have, there's a third aspect, right? So there is an understanding of the psychedelic landscape. There's an understanding of methodologies, right, that are useful and produce results, right? Coaching conversation being a methodology, triangle pose being a methodology, right? And then there's like presence, right? It's like, so how are you cultivating presence that allows people to again be seen and heard? Right? And so that I would almost take over all of them. If you don't have presence, you know, if you're just thinking about selling the next session or enrolling in your next class, even if you're a good coach, is that greed is going to seep through, and that's no good, right? It's like we know, again, if we know, if we have had the psychedelic vision that our vibrations matter, right? And our moods and our presence of being matters, and that kind of rapport, you know, is deeply, deeply important. But you might want to have all three. You need to do something to cultivate your presence so that you can show up for your people. And you need to have good, tested methodologies that produce results and an understanding of the psychedelic landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's three really important factors. I'd love to dig a little bit into the methodologies. You mentioned the triangle pose. You mentioned the coaching methodology. Could you tell us a bit more about what you're using as part of your methodology or process, other than being present, following the crumbs, spending time, holding space? There's usually something behind it theoretically, and I'd love to find out what that is for you.
Well, I like to inquire. I'm really into kind of the three lenses of context, identity, and soma, right? And, you know, seeing and acting from those places, right? Seeing, being, and acting from those places. And so we talked a bit about context. It's like, okay, you have a job and you have a relationship and maybe you have kids, and, you know, you live in a country that has politics and it has religion and economy and all that kind of stuff. And so your relationship to that matters. I see a lot of folks who are retirement age, right? They're empty nesters. Their kids have, they've raised their kids and they've done their job, and this is their time to look at themselves. So there's a change in context there, and how do they meet who they are and who they want to be? Mm-hmm. And what about the context challenges us, right? So the context has is ripe with challenges and critical feedback. When the challenges and critical feedback happen, it puts stress on our identity. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. And so there are so many things that one of the methodologies, and I'll just, this one's fun. I'm always on the lookout for the white knight, right?
Say a bit more.
You know the white knight, right? He runs in to like save the day.
Yeah.
And so we white knight ourselves all the time. And I will add, it's one of our strategies of evasion, right? So it's kind of like, we'll be talking about an issue that brings up an emotion. And so the question is like, what do you make that mean about you? Right? What's the story you tell yourself about who you are based on the fact that like you didn't get the promotion, whatever it is. And they're like, it means that I'm not good enough, but like I know I'm good enough because I do a lot of other good things, right? And you see how they come to their own rescue so quick? And it's like you gotta like tear off that smothering savior and actually look at this like deep wound of like, oh, like I'm not good enough, right? And so how do you do that with enough love so that like that part is like releases gently, right? You don't actually want, you said rip it off. You don't actually want to rip it off, right? Like how do you sort of like lubricate that relationship with enough love, acceptance, and presence so that like they can release their long-held tendency to protect themselves with soothing words and actually look at this deep wound that they've been protecting.
And then heal the root of that.
And then heal, and then look at that and be like, oh, wow, yeah, I am going to sit with that. And maybe even, I said the third one is somatic, right? So where do we feel that in the body, right? Whereas like, there's always going to be a physical pain or tension associated with something like that. And so, how do we use that as a cue, right? For example, like if I'm arguing with somebody on the internet over something stupid, which I do sometimes, my left shoulder lifts when I'm like trying to prove that I'm smart and I'm right and I know and I'm going to save the world by making a snarky comment. Like this lifts up and this lets me know that like, oh, you're doing it again.
So learning to become aware to those signs.
Relax that mental tendency through relaxing of the body.
So you'd ask specific questions around context, identity, and the somatic. Is that like, how can I imagine that when somebody's coming in to do some work, does that operate in the back of your mind that you kind of get a sense for these three areas? So how can we imagine that?
Oh yeah, I'm looking for that. Well, of course, it starts out with sort of those open coaching questions, of like, it's client led. So, we often will ask a few kind of warm up questions to help get people present, get in their body. Often we start with a meditation.
Like what kind of questions would you ask? It's always good to kind of put it as practical. I appreciate they vary and they come out in the moment, but just so the audience can get a bit of a sense for what they might sound like.
What are you aware of in your body in this moment? Hey, Yannick, what are you aware of in your body in this moment?
I do notice this pressure on my right ear as I'm wearing my headphones half on, and there's an interesting pressure in my back as well. An excitement in my jaw, which I'm not usually aware of. Thank you for that question.
Sure. And I appreciate that you did it with a minimum of story. You know, I'm sure you get that as coaches. You're like, you know, what are you aware of in? See, I'll give you an example. I'm going to take what you did and do it and show how it could have gone.
Mm-hmm.
What are you aware of in your body? Well, I'm aware of this weird pressure in my ear because my headphones half on and half off. And I got these headphones last week and I might keep them and I'm not sure. And I'm a little worried because like the date of the return is coming up really soon. But like, oh, now I'm in Mexico and like, I can't go to the post office because like my parents are old and, you know, and so it's good to notice if your client's prone to doing that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so bringing them back to like training focus and attention is so important for the psychedelic space, for the psychedelic journey. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you want to be a psychedelic coach and you're not training your clients' minds to be present, focused, and attentive and concentrated, then you're not helping them. Then they're just gonna, you know, you're just sort of setting them up to flop around on the ground some more when they get high. Right?
And so
if you train them in attention and focus, then they're going to be more able to have a certain amount of agency as they meet their psychic material.
Mm-hmm. And is that with meditation or what are the tools used to improve focus besides meditating and
meditating, journaling, answering questions directly,
concisely
and concisely,
paying attention, bringing attention to it, that they do it. And
yeah, I have a class in sort of meditation. It's called Meditation for the Journey, aka Sitting for Psychonauts. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's sort of my opportunity to, you know, do that. It's part of the job that's like so fun for me, is to kind of focus on the teachings.
I'm disappointed your meditation class in January is very sold out.
We'll do one again probably in June.
Good.
There's a lot of questions I still want to ask. I think one that is often on the minds of coaches as they are considering to work with something like psychedelics is the legal status of it. Does that affect you at all? And you know, I mean, in some levels,
well, I lose clients all the time because I won't give them drugs. Like, I don't provide. I'm not a drug dealer.
Of course not.
Right. Like, I want to work with people who want to work. Well, some, you know, there are people out there, are guides who provide stuff. I don't provide anything to anybody. I live I try to live as low risk a lifestyle as possible. Mm-hmm. And so I work with people who want to do work. And, you know, it's 2020 and you can grow mushrooms in your closet. And so, yeah, so that's how it affects me, is that people want what they want, and it's not always to do work. It would sometimes be easier, like it would be easier to be a men's coach, because those people are ready to do work and you can yell at them. Men's coaches are some of the shoutiest coaches around, I think. Not that I really want to yell at them, but you know what I mean? Is that
you don't seem the yelly type.
people show up, you know, wanting a silver bullet. They just want the experience to happen to them, and they don't always want to do the work that comes with it.
Yeah, I know some coaches they are somewhat concerned about being seen as supporting any form of illegal activity if they were to provide those kind of services. And I mean, if somebody had an experience and they bring it to you and they help them make sense of that, there's no involvement. But if we were to, you know, offering preparation work, is that of any concern for you?
The drug war has created stigma and created shame. And it's our job, if we're psychedelic advocates, if we're good members of the psychedelic community, it should be our job to actively work to dismantle like internalized shame and stigma. You know, otherwise be a men's coach.
If the laws were different and everything was completely legal, would you change your practice at all? Would you want to provide or do anything differently?
Maybe. I mean, I think that it would probably, if things were legal, then I would probably encourage all of, okay, in a perfect world, all of my clients would grow their own medicine.
Yeah.
And they would come and we would work with their medicine, and they would see the relationship between the thing that they've grown themselves and how they are actively working in their healing and growth. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, full circle. Your baby
cool.
you make gives, yeah.
Any word of warning for coaches who want to operate in this space, or who kind of trained coaches who come into that space, or perhaps people with experiences in journeying who want to become a coach?
Warning?
Yeah, any
What do you think I'm gonna say? What kind of warning? Don't quit.
Don't do it.
Don't quit your day job.
Why
You
not?
know, it's like building a coaching practice I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and I tell him the things that I do to build my business. And he's like, really? I was like, yeah, how do you get clients? He was like, I'm on WebMD and they just call me and I have a full schedule. So it's like building a coaching practice is an Olympic sport. And there are, and if you're on social media and you like join a couple of coach groups, you're going to start getting ads from people who are going to promise you that they're going to make sure that you're like a 6-figure coach in 3 weeks or less. Those people are lying to you. Don't give those people any money. What I want you to do is I want you to schedule, use like one of the email addresses you use for spam, and schedule one of their discovery coaching amazing transformation calls, and watch how they try and sell you, how they don't actually care about you, that they ask you a sequence of questions designed to make you feel bad about yourself, and then they position themselves as the only answer to your pain, and then they try and sell you a ridiculously high cost coaching package that is not going to help you. And so get on like 3 of those calls, and then don't do that to other people. Right? So that's my warning, is like, there's no quick fix to building a successful coaching practice. There is long hours of dedicated work, especially if you plan on being ethical and you actually care about people. And don't give me this thing, is like, if you actually care about people, you're not going to let them get off the phone without them giving you money. Like, that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, have some freaking integrity. And recognize that you do have to study how to build a business, because you might not know. And if you don't know, don't pretend that you know. There are things that you can do to build a business that will work. Mm-hmm. And there are things that you can do to build a business ethically that will work. But it's a grind. So my warning is like, don't do that. Keep your day job. Mm-hmm. Is that what you mean?
Well, that's good enough. I wonder if you could share some of those things that you do. I mean, not the general kind of business building activities, because that's not what this is about, but like specifically as part of the psychedelic community or the psychedelic work. What works for you? Where do you get clients? How do you build connections? How do you get people to call you?
Okay, so here's the big misnomer. The big thing is, everybody, they like have a psychedelic vision and they're like, oh my God, I'm gonna like start an amazing community. There's already an amazing community. Like, you don't have to be in charge of like all of the things. You don't have to like plant your flag and like be the center of attention. It's like, get to know the other members of the community. There's a lot of stuff out there. Go make some friends. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not talking about marks where you're trying to like, oh, how can I like, you know, how can I just like, troll around on Facebook groups to try and find somebody that is nice to me once, and now I'm going to try and sell them stuff. Like, make a good, it doesn't have to be perfect, make a good enough website, build an email list, make your lead magnet, and go and be cool to people. And just like, if you're cool to people for like 3 years, you'll probably start getting some clients.
Mhm.
Like this thing. And again, it's like how to get 10 clients in 30 days or less. I've never done that. Do you know the amount of work that is even required to onboard 10 people and to sell them? And how many conversations you have to have with people to close 10? Yannick, how many client conversations do you have? What's your batting average? Like, how many conversations you have to close 10?
Well, depends on the kind of conversation, right? Because the conversation usually starts before. I can have 10 conversations and sign up 8 clients, but chances are that I would have had some form of conversations with these people before, either through a podcast like this, or through having written something, or through a training, or being in the same community and having been cool in their space.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually what happens. I think there are.
You gave me you said 80%.
That's about the number I get from the actual formal consultations that get booked in, and how many people want to work with.
I should study with you.
Well, let me tell you about my 10-step process.
Closing 80%, man.
No, I don't have a 10-step process.
You know what I mean? So it's like the amount of work that is required to kind of create clients for me is a lot. I might be working too hard. I don't mind work. I kind of don't mind working too hard. And I'm also aware that, the Grateful Dead said that they're like licorice. Not everybody likes licorice, but the people who like licorice really, really like it. And so like a lot of people, I'm not right for everybody.
In the UK, that's Marmite.
What's that?
In the UK, that's Marmite. It's this, I think, horrendous, horrible, disgusting spread you ruin toast with.
Oh, right. The Australians like it too, or is that Vegemite?
That's Vegemite, but similar.
It's similar.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, go on. There you go. I was going to ask another question. Finish.
No, please. I'm just spiraling. I'm just spiraling out and kind of frustration and.
Should we do one? Do you have one more question, Heather, before we go?
Well, I was just going to ask. I mean,
thing?
You did say, there's of course a lot of coaches that are coming into this space right now. Someone probably similar to me that is just ready to do this work. But what other, besides people kind of flooding into coaching and psychedelics, what other trends are you seeing that's happening in the psychedelic space?
Trends? Well, a positive trend is, let's go positive.
Yeah.
A positive trend is greater respect and understanding of Indigenous culture. Is that, there's an active working to try to bring Indigenous voices into the fold, into sort of these psychedelic conferences that are popping up all over the place. Is that is a nice effort being made to recognize that there are traditions who have been using medicine for a long, long time effectively. And that to be good neighbors is important. And to, honor other voices are important, and to not, we were talking about don't just kind of show up and like plant your flag and insist, speaking of which, there's my flag. Don't just like plant your flag and, insist that you're the center of the universe, but kind of recognize that the teachings have come from somewhere, and that there are other people who are doing things, and that we're an ecosystem and that we're in it together. And so that is hopefully happening more and more and more. Hopefully that is a continuing trend, and that, our kind of the respect for nature that we gain from using these medicines can hopefully turn into an increase in a desire to actually conserve nature and offer reciprocity.
Mhm.
You know, reciprocity for the you know, for the tribes and for the land and things like that. Tam Integration donates to, you know, for example, you know, the Indigenous Council for Protection of Peyote, you know, and things like that, you know, which, you know, is out of the Southwest, you know, peyote being an endangered species that, you know, is a sacrament, is a legitimate sacrament. So that's a cool trend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is, especially after we had that trend to medicalize all of these substances. So it's good to hear that there's a countering trend to bring in more of the indigenous knowledge and learn from it, you know, and study.
Right.
Well, I think people are starting to understand that peyote is very endangered and not to use it just because it's there, that maybe to be more thoughtful about it.
Yes.
Origins.
We have we have 10 minutes left. There's a couple of questions. There could be kind of quick fire questions. You could answer them quite short and succinctly. You can also get into some depth if you wanted to, but like, let me just throw a couple of them at you, and then we see what comes out of that.
Heather laughed because she's like, he's not going to be quick.
Oh, they're good questions.
Let's do them. Let's lightning round. Here we go.
Heather, you take the first one.
Books or people that have really impacted your work. You named.
Be Here Now.
Yes, you named that.
And let's say Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson is a work that's derived from the work of Timothy Leary, which is good for tuning up your nervous system, being that that's what you're doing when you're doing psychedelics. You know, you're working with your nervous system.
What do you think about regulation? Coaching is quite open. There are some professional bodies in the psychedelic space. Is it more needed? Is it in the way of people doing good work? What do you think?
I don't like regulation. Regulation's overrated.
Cool, we can keep that up.
What about, without breaking confidentiality, a memorable client of yours that really sticks out to you?
I like to say that I am the psychedelic integration coach to the stars. And the spoiler alert is that we're all stars.
Aww.
I like that. If somebody were to ask you, I mean, we kind of felt into it a little bit, but if somebody would ask you about the differences between coaching and therapy, what do you say to them?
Coaching is for healthy people who want a greater, who want a greater range of tools to, you know, live the life that they want.
Mm-hmm.
This is a good question. I think you'll like it. If you were going to take over the screen of any person or group of people, including the whole world, and you could have their attention for undivided attention for a minute, what would you tell them, and who would it be?
The screen, like I can just,
You could zoom the whole world at once. What would you tell them?
Or one person, or a specific.
Or yeah. Be just the police. It could be anything.
I'm good.
You don't need to. You have no messages.
I have an audience that's like, you know, I get to say I'm fortunate. I'm like really lucky and really privileged. I have a decent audience. You know, I can get, you know, I can make a silly meme and get, you know, 1,000 likes on it.
Yeah.
You know,
do a lot.
I'm okay.
No messages you need to send out there.
My message is out there. I love you. I love you.
You say that, yes, you do. Well, you do a lot. I mean, you have 2 podcasts, you have Instagram, you've got it all. You do a lot of platforms.
That brings us sort of to our last question. Where can people find you? Where can people learn more about your work? Is there anything you wanted to, promote, send out? Where can people learn from you?
Well, I have all of the, you know, I have all the social properties for Tam Integration. Right now, my Instagram is full of silly memes, silly, lighthearted memes about psychedelics. My Twitter is right now a lot of quotes from the Psilocybin Summit, which is a conference that I produce every year. TamIntegration.com has links to the free integration circles that we offer and other online courses and things like that. You can hang out with me on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific. We have a gift, it's a gift integration circle. And yeah, you can come to that. You can hang out with me and like other people who are like better, like really like other great people. It's becoming a really wonderful community in the sense that every member, all the value comes from every member supporting each other. Right? It's not about like me, again, like, it's not about me being like, this is the way it is. It's like a bunch of people sharing their experience and like everybody else being like, that's awesome. Have you thought about this? And so that's what's going on, or, you can always just, you can find me walking to the post office, Great Barrington, Massachusetts.
Not here anymore, though.
What's that?
Not here in the Bay anymore, though.
No, I left the Bay. The Bay. I live in the woods. I live in the woods. This morning before the call, I started working on reishi tincture from like local reishi mushrooms. So like, I'm raising my baby in the woods and making mushroom tinctures.
Fantastic.
Living the dream.
So if you want to coach that's what his hobbies are, you know where to find me.
Just venture in the woods and you'll meet Daniel on his way to the post office.
Yeah, they don't deliver mail here.
Okay. Hence the
that's how little this town is. There's not a mail truck.
Right. Heather, anything else you wanted to say or ask?
No, I just want to thank you for everything you do for the community, especially here in the Bay. You give a lot, so thank you.
For sure, happy to.
Yeah. Same
Let me
here.
know when this is up and I'll share it out.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you for your time.
I really like the rapid fire round.
We'll do another one. We come up with some more questions.
Yeah, I want to get like 20 of them. We can do like an Instagram live. We'll just get
that'd be fun.
And get them done in like 5 minutes.
Awesome.
Great.
Cool. Daniel, thank you.
Thank you.
See you around.
All right, be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
No, you hang up. No, you hang up.
You can hang up.
Oh, I thought you were. For some reason, I thought you were going to turn the recording off, and then we were going to say, "Oh, that was great."